Hello everyone. I have yet another case for you all of a young man who would go missing after a night of partying in St. John's, Newfoundland. And it's yet another one that will leave you puzzled. 20-year-old Josh Miller was born in 1992. He was an aspiring police officer and was very enthusiastic about life to the point that it inspired other people. He wanted to help people and was a hard worker who held down two jobs, one at a local Rona hardware store and another as a bouncer. He was living in St. John's, Newfoundland, the capital and largest city of the Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador, located on the eastern tip of the Avalon Peninsula. The last time Josh's stepmother, Mary Ann Miller, would see her son was during a family funeral in 2011. On February 8th of 2013, Josh would be at his friend Fergus's house, located on Margaret's Place. This was a regular party house for the university friends. The night before, when they had been partying, they decided afterwards that they would all go downtown to continue their night. So this day, Josh also wanted to continue partying. However, Fergus wasn't feeling it that night, saying, quote, "I realized I wasn't going to go out, and I said I was going to take it easy tonight. Josh usually crashed here a lot of the time, so I just told him to keep in touch. Let me know if you need me to pick you up or anything like that." End quote. So with that, Josh would head over to George Street, which is a street in St. John's that had a lot of bars and clubs. While Josh was out, he continued texting with Fergus. However, eventually around midnight, the texts would suddenly stop. Despite this, Fergus would stay up pretty late waiting to see if Josh would need a ride. He would even try calling Josh's phone, but got no answer. Unbeknownst to Fergus, other friends who had been out that night with Josh would recount that a fight had broken out inside of a club that would eventually spill out onto the street. These friends would then put him inside of a taxi that headed to the Stavanger Drive area around 2 a.m. A citywide taxi driver would report to have dropped Josh off in the area of Blue Putty Drive near Stavanger Drive to meet a friend. Despite the frigid temperatures that had taken over St. John's that February, that dropped to even negative 20 degrees Celsius at times, Josh would get out of this taxi only wearing a t-shirt and jeans. But from the narrative, Josh would end up jumping out of this taxi without paying his cab fare and then hopping a fence. The issue was, Josh's friends didn't know anyone that lived in this area. They also didn't know anyone that Josh would have been friends with that lived in that area, let alone anyone that he'd want to see in the middle of the night. Fergus saying, quote, "Why would he jump out of the cab and run away with no jacket? At this point, maybe he realizes, okay, I can't pay for the cab, but why not turn around? He gets in a cab and goes somewhere where I've never heard of him speak of anyone. I've known the guy for a couple of years, and somehow I've never heard of anyone out there." End quote. Another question would be, why would Josh take a taxi all the way out of town instead of just going back to Fergus's, who was very, very close to George Street? And that seemed to be the plan. He always went and crashed at his best friend's place after partying. His car was even there still, so that he could, wake up in the morning and then go to work or go back home or go wherever he wanted to go. If he had taken this taxi all the way to the north side of town, he would be stranded there with no vehicle, nowhere to actually stay. It just didn't really make sense. And it turns out Josh actually had work the next day. So it made even less sense that he would have went all the way over there. And unsurprisingly, that next morning, Josh missed his shift at Rona, which actually turned out to be very close to the area where he had been dropped off. Meanwhile, Fergus was wondering why Josh hadn't come back to pick up his car that day, which was still parked at his house. Josh was said to love his Charger. He had worked really hard to save up the money to buy it, and he was very proud, and he had been working towards a lot of goals in his current life. So getting that car had been a really big deal to him. It wasn't something he would just abandon somewhere and, not come back for. And when no one could get in contact with Josh that day, he would very quickly be reported missing. For days after, his friends would bear the harsh winter conditions trying to locate their friend. A Universal helicopter from Fire and Emergency Services would also search the air, while officers on horseback conducted ground searches in the area that Josh was thought to last be seen. RNC K-9 Unit, the Mounted Unit, Rover Search and Rescue, members from the Criminal Investigation Division, and also Patrol Service members would participate in the hopeful rescue. People in the neighborhood were also asked to look in sheds and under back decks in case he had taken shelter from the cold weather. Police would end up interviewing the individual that Josh had fought with at the bar before his disappearance, but they would end up determining that there wasn't any correlation between that fight and him going missing. They would also interview the taxi driver. However, they would clear him as well. But inside of the taxi driver's car, they would end up finding Josh's white iPhone. Police ended up not being able to uncover any of the data outside of incoming and outgoing calls for some reason. And they would end up determining that one call had been from Fergus. As he had said, he had tried to call Josh that night to see if he needed to get picked up. However, he got no answer. Theories about what happened to Josh began to swirl around the small town. Everyone was talking about Josh and what may have happened to him, from, table night dinners in the kitchen to at parties. And this ended up leading to a lot of tips. In the end, police would end up with 3 possible areas that Josh may have been seen that night and the days following. One tip placed Josh at the Avalon Mall the day after he went missing. Another tip would come in from a former girlfriend's roommate, who reported seeing Josh outside the home in the Cumberland Crescent area, which is also close to that mall. However, the third was in an area off Mount Skio Road where Josh would often visit his girlfriend or by himself. Because of these tips, police would focus on these areas. But days would turn to years. And after 2 years of no answers, a witness would come forward claiming to have seen a man matching Josh's description walking over a snowbank and into a wooded area near RCAF Road, about 2 kilometers from where he'd been dropped off by the taxi. This would have been nearly a 50-minute walk to that area by the airport. And remember, Josh was only wearing a t-shirt and jeans in negative 20-degree weather. This would end up leading police to search that area, and they believed at this point that they were going to find Josh's remains somewhere out there, that he had died from the elements, possibly in the woods. However, they would say to have thoroughly searched this area, and nothing again would be found. Harry Blackmore, who is a member of the Rover Search and Rescue team, had also been optimistic at first after this tip, thinking that they would find Josh somewhere in the woods, or maybe he had gotten caught by a tree, broken his leg, something of that nature, and, got stranded out there and died from the elements. However, after going over that massive area about 2 to 3 times with what they say was a fine-tooth comb, they still didn't find any sign of Josh or any evidence. What is also odd as well is that this area where the last witness claims to have seen Josh is much closer to where the taxi dropped him off, but it's also not anywhere near the area where other witnesses, earlier on claimed they had seen him in the days after his disappearance. That mall, that friend of the ex-girlfriend, people you think that would definitely recognize him. I guess it's possible, to mistake someone, especially if you're not seeing them right up close or talking to them. But these witness sightings are kind of all over the place. And considering the area that the taxi driver dropped him off was mainly very residential as well as retail, you'd think if he had, stumbled down the street and died from the elements, that they would have found him right away. However, I guess if he had walked over towards the airport, it was definitely more rural going that way after. But would it be possible for someone to walk nearly an hour without proper, clothing on in the winter like that and not, succumb sooner? I'm not sure, but it's just very strange. A friend of Josh's named Chris Duke would say in a 2015 article, and I quote, "I can't even fathom the fact that 2 years later we're still here. We're still at a stalemate at this point. Just the lack of pertinent information that has come along in the last 2 years and the lack of progression in the investigation. I mean, we're virtually at a standstill. It's been tumultuous at best. From day to day, there's times when you can completely tune it out. You can go about your day as if it's a normal routine. But then there's days when even the slightest trigger from a song or a passing location that can bring the situation right to the forefront of your thought pattern. It seems like our efforts have been futile. I mean, you try to keep these feelings of optimism that eventually something will come forward that will lead to the right direction. There's days where you're feeling sad and upset at the fact that this is happening. Then it hits close to home. It's a complexity of emotions that I don't wish upon either friend or foe." End quote. When it comes to theories about what happened to Josh, as a lot of these cases we have been talking about recently have gone, there's really not that much information, so it's so hard to say what could have happened. As I already said, the fact that he was last dropped off in a residential/retail area, you'd think he would have been found very quickly on if he had just died from the elements on the street. So that makes me wonder, was he kidnapped then? Was he actually going to a friend's house up there in a Y when he could have just went back to Fergus's? Was he just so out of it that, he told the driver the wrong way to go and he ended up out there and didn't know where he was going? Maybe he actually wanted to go to Fergus's. He told the driver he was going to his friend's, but then the driver took him to the wrong area. And then Josh got out thinking he was by Fergus's and got lost and very disoriented, not knowing where he was. But then again, he knew that area, it seems, because he worked in that area. But I guess depending on how intoxicated he may have been, it's hard to say. Now, I know police have cleared the taxi driver, but I do find it odd that Josh's phone was found in there. I mean, again, if he was drunk, he could have just dropped it in there. It's possible too. But it's just a weird situation where the taxi driver took him up there, his phone's found in the car, and he goes missing. Could there be more to this that we just don't know about? And this time, Josh was dropped off nowhere near the ocean. So it's not like he could have just fallen in the water like the last case we talked about of the young man that went missing in St. John's. Why are there so many cases like this where young men wander off after getting drunk, sometimes in cities because he was dropped off in the middle of the city, and then they just vanish? It's so Strange. I think it's interesting to note that Josh would disappear 7 years after Danny Pickett disappeared from St. John's. And he was also last seen by friends after partying in the George Street area. It's so weird. Why is there such a pattern of this across Canada, particularly young men? And the fact that there's never any evidence, there's never any sign of them, it makes it even stranger to me. Could they all just be dying of the elements in the woods and no one's finding them? Or is there something else going on here? Are they involved in stuff we don't know about? Or are they getting picked up by people with nefarious intentions that are taking advantage of their intoxicated states? I can understand in certain scenarios when, there's a young man maybe wandering around in a rural area, maybe someone stops and they hitchhike and then go missing. But in a city like St. John's, why would he hitchhike? So that just doesn't make sense. What I do find odd, though, is that none of these cases are happening in one specific area of Canada. There are a lot of them that are happening in Nova Scotia specifically, which is very odd, but there are some that are still happening in other places. Now, could there be a serial killer of sorts, hunting young men down in Nova Scotia or, in Eastern Canada? But that would require this person to constantly be driving around at night, specifically scoping out young men that are intoxicated. I guess that's not too far-fetched. But what do you think? I think it's just very strange that all of these young men could be wandering off and then, dying in the perfect location to never be found. That just seems too coincidental to me, if that is what's happening. If you know anything about what may have happened to Josh, please say something. I'll have the authorities to contact down below. And I will also be in the comment section chatting with you all. Do you have any theories of what may have happened to Josh? Do you know any information that I didn't include in today's video? Let's chat about it down below. And let's take one more good look at Josh before we go, just in case it sparks someone's memory. Josh is described as a white male standing 6 foot 1 inches tall and weighing about 180 pounds, blue eyes and short sandy hair. At the time of his disappearance, he was wearing blue jeans and a purple or mauve shirt with black stripes. My heart goes out to Josh's family and his friends who put in so much effort to try to find him. I truly hope you all eventually get answers. And I think as we continue to talk about these videos, the number one thing is use a buddy system still. Even though you're an adult, you should still always have a buddy system. So far, we haven't come across one of these cases where a young man goes missing where he's with someone else. It's always they wander off alone and then vanish. So please, to prevent this from happening in the future, do what we're told as kids. Buddy up. Always stay with a friend. If you want to go off somewhere, at least have a friend with you so that there's a better chance that, if they see something, they can report it, or you have a better chance of just not vanishing. There's strength in numbers. Also, comment down below if you know another one of these cases, because I want to continue to cover them because there has to be some pattern here. I think this is something we need to continue talking about. Young men going missing in Canada after nights of partying, as well as, vehicles being burned off of logging roads. Very odd. And as always, please stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.